Hi, welcome to the Legislators Lounge. I'm Jim Webb, the host of the show, and Brian Chirichiello, co-host of the show. Today with us, we have Representative Frank Saparato from Derry and Representative John O'Connor from Derry. Welcome.
Thanks. Great to be here.
And welcome, Reps. We appreciate you guys coming over onto the show. And let's start off by giving the audience actually your name, how long you lived in Derry, and the committees that you're on at the State House. We'll start with John.
Okay, and again, my name is John O'Connor. I've been in Derry for approximately 30 years. I was a former Scoutmaster for Troop 402 and currently retired. And so based on that, I have the availability of giving time back to the town and the state. I am currently a member of the Knights of Columbus at St. Thomas. I'm on the Downtown Committee and the Economic Development Group within the town, and also the past 8 years I'm the Vice Chairman of the Derry Planning Board. This is my second term as a state rep, as your rep, and I'm involved in the Agricultural and Environmental Committee, spending 40 years of my life in the dairy industry, along with the environmental, agricultural, and also associated with the federal government. And so the last thing I'm on in the state is with the Business Coalition, and we'll discuss that later on. So nice to be here. Thank you.
Great. And Frank, how you doing?
How you doing? Great to be on again.
Okay.
Frank Saparato. I've been here for over 20 years. I was the former taxpayer chairman, Charter Commission, Zoning Board, 6th term in the House, 1 term in the Senate for Derry, and my main issue has been trying to help out Derry property taxes and making sure that we're not taxed out of Derry. I've served on everything from judiciary. I'm currently on past 5 terms on Ways and Means, House Ways and Means. Most recently, we had the gambling bill come through our committee. Yep. You know, we're unfortunately we missed by 30 votes, but here we are. But it's a pleasure to be here.
Great, thank you.
Well, thanks. Well, I'll start off, and I'll basically kind of go through the same format we went with the other Derry reps, right? Even though they were all freshmen, but in particular, I wanted to ask you basically, what do you think of the House, right, as it is right now? The way things are flowing, if it's working. You know, it's of course the Democrats are in control right now. So I'd just like to get your idea on how you think things are going.
I guess I'll answer first. On that, on the committee level, I find within the Environmental Ag Committee that we are really a bipartisan, and we made an agreement when we started this year that we would drop our labels off at the door, and we would do what was right for the people of New Hampshire. Yep. As we moved into the House, I find that a lot more difficult. I find that there is a division within the various groups, and that the art of compromise at this point is not quite where I believe it should be.
Well, every decade or so we have a major issue. 10 to 12 years ago, a big issue, of course, was Claremont with the education funding, and of course there's a major impact on Derry's taxes. This time around, for the past couple of terms, we've had issues where on gambling, which would have had a significant impact on Derry's taxes. Derry was standing to get a good chunk of the revenue in the last casino bill. We look pretty good. I've been there when times we've not been able to pass a gambling bill by over 230 votes. We've indefinitely postponed it. You know, we came within 30 votes last time, which is a leap forward. I believe that next term around we're going to have the votes we need to pass that. And how that debate is shaped will determine, will be done by whichever party's in power. We saw House Bill 593 a couple of years ago that was about gambling that was going to reduce all the business taxes. It was going to make New Hampshire a mecca for jobs. Tremendous bill, long-term vision, and of course we killed that. The one we just killed now went to fixing the budget right now. I believe if the Republicans are back in power again, we'll come through with a good bill that will take elements of the one that was just killed, the regulatory elements, which were worked on very in detail, and the other aspect of it, where who gets the revenue, where does the revenue go? Derry would have stand to receive anywhere from $3 to $8 million with the last proposal per year, which would have had a significant impact on our taxes here in Derry. And as it shows from the polling, over 75% of our constituents support expanded gambling. So, you know, we need to be able to get that for the next term around, and I'd like to be part of that.
While we're on the subject of gambling, let's. We all know that the Derry reps all supported that because A, it would have brought money to Derry.
Almost all Derry reps.
No.
Wasn't it all of them?
No,
No,
okay.
there was one person that didn't.
All right, stand corrected. But let me ask you a question. Why do you think so many Democrats were against it? Did you hear anything in?
Well, I was part of the super committee where we combined the Finance Committee and Ways and Means. I believe that was done because the votes in Ways and Means would have voted to pass it. And as you know, we all know that the super committee came within one vote of giving it a not to pass recommendation.
Right.
We came that close. So, you know, I think that the committees, the makeup of the committees.
Right,
There was
but
something.
now we also heard that in committees there were 21 amendments that if it had passed, we would have heard
17.
the whole House would have heard 21 different separate amendments. You may have heard some of the
We
reasoning
heard them all
behind
in the
that.
super committee. I was part of it.
You were part of the super committee,
which we worked on for a long, every day for 3 weeks.
right? But I mean, us in the House didn't hear any of those amendments. That was tough. So, can you share with us?
Yeah,
any of
they were corrective. The original proposal done through the Senate, correct me if I'm wrong, do you remember some elements of this, you know, they had flaws in it. It had regulatory flaws, impact, and what they did was they divided that super committee up into impact, tax revenue, and regulation. And of those three areas, each committee, subcommittees did a lot of work on that to correct them.
Okay.
It was all put together in one bill called the Omnibus Bill, which was the first one to come up. But since they know how the votes were going to go in super committee, because they had already counted them before, they knew they could not even bring up those amendments and quickly take what should have been a day-long meeting and be over in maybe half an hour.
Right.
That's what happened. So when it got to the floor, they never got the opportunity to bring those amendments forward because the recommendation was to kill the bill.
Right.
I don't think that's going to happen again. And that was so close. That was one vote in that super committee.
Right, and staying on.
And that vote was cast by, against the committee by a representative in Salem, New
Well,
Hampshire.
no, you can't really
If
say
one
that
would
the
say
vote.
on that.
You
It was
can't say the
enough.
vote was cast by that
John, let
person.
me ask you this question. Since we're still on gambling, I want to ask you, John, this question.
Follow up on just on his.
Yeah.
One of the key things why I think it failed in the House was the fact that on the regulatory section of that bill, there was not enough in there for regulatory oversight. I do believe that the committee that's in place right now, that's getting ready to put regulatory oversight and administrative rules, so that when it does come up, which I believe it will come up next year, I think we'll have a better chance at it. Because if we do not do this here, then the state will lose an impact of anywhere between $35 to $50 million just on the HHS side, as far as the Gambling Anonymous portion of it that we're going to have to support. That is something that, if it passed, that was part of the original program that they were going to pay,
Right.
using Millennium as an example, they were going to be paying that up front.
Right.
Because Mass passed there.
Mass passed
But
that.
here's the million-dollar question. Why do you think that the governor could not sway the Democrats to go her way? Because
Oh,
if that
she
happened,
tried.
but what I'm saying, I mean, what failed there? Because we all know that if the Democrats had followed the governor's lead, we would have gambling.
Well, if you look at the results, I mean, it really wasn't partisan. Majority of Republicans voted against it.
Yeah,
was the big part of
that's
the problem.
true. I think all but, what is it, 30 or 40 of us voted?
Yeah. Now, in the regulatory, I think we did more work this time on regulatory than we've ever done in the past. But the issue being right now is we're looking at Suffolk Downs with a $1.2 billion investment to Suffolk Downs. We're lucky enough to have Charlie McIntyre, the head of the Sweepstakes Commission, who was #3 in Massachusetts. So we get inside information to what Mass is doing. And we know that site that they're looking at is sitting on a $250,000 toxic waste site, a chemical plant that'll cost them $250,000 to clean. Now, that means that $1.2 billion, the facility they would produce there would not be superior to ours,
Right.
and the infrastructure just doesn't exist. You can't get into Everett.
Well, when we would Suffolk Downs, I I spoke on the floor in pro gambling, and I brought up Suffolk Downs because I actually used to live in Revere. as many of our viewers and people who live here in Derry are from the Massachusetts area. And they know that Suffolk Downs, on one side you have the oil farms on one side, and on the other side you have the train station and the hill and the airport. So, and you have the planes flying by and the noise and everything else. It's not like they're going to be able to build a super quality hotel
construction
there.
costs were 40% higher than we have here in New Hampshire. Those are the revenue estimates that we had gotten in. So our $500 million facility that we were going to have, and again, that proposal required $500 million invested in 3 years, plus an $80 million licensing fee.
Right.
I mean, the money was enormous. 2,000 jobs right off the top. I mean, it was something that definitely would have benefited the area.
Right.
But you had to have the votes to pass it.
Right.
And to further on your question regarding why didn't the Democrats follow suit with their leader, the governor?
Right.
Obviously, that is a good question for a Democrat. I found it strange that they did not go along with her. Another serious concern that I see coming forward with it, and I grew up next to where Mr. Representative Webb lived in Lynn, Mass., which was right next to Wonderland and Suffolk, so very familiar with that particular area. I do know that it wasn't brought up during the meeting, but the Mall of New Hampshire down there, I'm sorry, Rockingham Mall, they had on the drawing boards, once this went through, to expand that whole mall, because anticipation of additional transfers of people coming in from Massachusetts and Connecticut coming into New Hampshire, that would have not only benefit them, which is the business enterprise tax and the business profit tax, but also all the restaurants that were going to be growing in that area. So that would also improve the rooms and meals tax and whatever else they purchased as they left the state of New Hampshire. So this, to me, was a perfect win-win. There was another serious concern that a lot of us received letters from the local charitable organizations, and they thought they were going to lose out, but the charitable organizations were going to be held whole, and they would show for the last few years whatever they made. If they lost in the future, then the Millennium would then put up front whatever the loss was, if there was a loss. Most places have shown that actually they still maintain the charitable gaming at that location, and they actually gain on that. So I thought it personally, from my opinion, I thought it was going to be a win-win.
Yeah. Yeah.
Booze, butts, and bets. That's how we make
Yeah,
it.
that's right. I remember you saying that on the floor. That was
1964, the first state to put in the lottery, and here we go. And the same arguments existed back then. If you look at the debate then, is the same as we have today.
Right.
And you know, this is live free or die. If you want group rights, go to Massachusetts.
right. Right. Now, speaking of butts, I guess we passed medical marijuana
Yeah.
this time around, and maybe you've probably seen it a few times in the House, Frank, because you've been there a while. But what are your thoughts on that, real quick?
You know, I've seen it fail many times. Also, you might want to mention that even the decriminalization passed the House too by 5 votes. You know, so there's been a lot of movement on that front.
Yeah.
There are a lot of costs associated as far as incarceration, law enforcement, and so forth. That people really to look at. You know, whether or not it's really worth that kind of money to spend on it. It's, you know, we're paying in our property taxes.
Right.
Yeah, just the decriminalization was a good thing because, you know, if somebody gets prosecuted for possession of marijuana, and then you have to go through the court process,
Right.
the sentencing, the time that's served, and
We're the toughest state in New England.
and all that combined costs us a lot of money.
Absolutely.
For maybe minor crimes, you don't know, just because they happen to have some on their possession or whatever. But in the long run, overall, it's no worse than alcohol or whatever being in your possession. So to enforce a law like that's going to cost us money, that didn't make any sense. So.
We may be on different sides on where the issue is, but I used to work at Michigan Cancer Foundation in experimental therapeutics when I got out of college, and the people who made it in my department had very short time to live, and I saw firsthand. After what I saw, there's no way I could have voted against it.
Right.
I'm going to concur with Representative Saparato. I have family members, 3 of them, in Nova Scotia, and in Canada that's allowed. And if it wasn't for medical marijuana, I have an older cousin that would have been not still living today if it wasn't for medical marijuana. And 3 of them have benefited from it.
Right.
And that made my decision a lot easier after seeing firsthand Actually, they're allowed to grow it there. They're allowed 3 plants each.
Right.
And whereas we're not allowing that in this state at this point in time, but it did make an impact on their life and the ease of pain and so forth. So
We are the last state.
I made that
working on it.
decision.
Well, I think it's a no-brainer. I mean, personally, I've had quite a few of my family members pass away from cancer as well, and the thing you got to look at is somebody's terminally ill. You shouldn't be withholding anything from them that makes them feel a little bit
Quality
better
of
in
life
their
issue.
last days.
Yeah, absolutely. But mentioning smoking, though, Massachusetts has just helped us out pretty good with the raise in their tobacco
Cigarette
tax of
right.
of $1 per pack.
Wow.
Which, of course, you know, the debate we had in the House, we had I had co-sponsored a bill to lower it by 10 cents. That was sunsetted. It's been repealed, so it goes up 10 cents.
Right.
But instead of going up another 20 cents, in the negotiations, we were able to keep that down. Now that Mass has gone up with their dollar, things should be looking right on spot for revenue.
Right.
Which, by the way, we are $9 million ahead of revenue estimate now.
For this year.
As of right now, we are.
Wow, that's great. That actually shows that businesses are picking up and the economy's
Yes.
getting a little bit better.
Particularly your industry, Brian, real estate.
Yeah, well, I know. I see that firsthand. It's
gotta
been-
report,
You
yeah,
know, it's
last
funny
month.
because I thought maybe the downturn would be a couple of years, and it was like 5-6 years. I'm like, wow, this is incredible. But we're making inroads, and it is changing.
Yep.
Let's focus back in on Derry for a little bit, since we're all Derry reps, and your thoughts about. We all heard the gas tax debate, and the fact that it did not pass. And they're actually talking about not continuing I-93 from exit 3 to exit 6. We all know that they're working on
Well,
exit
we'll
5,
always have
but it's
discussion
like
of what's
exit,
gonna be completed
but
in
exit
the
4 is not going to be completed, or they're threatening to shut that down. What is that going to do to Derry?
Let me add a couple of things to that, and not only exit 4, which is considered a catastrophic area within the state DOT, but also exit 4A, which is already approved and will be targeted for future revenue. And again, just to digress slightly on the gambling bill, Senator Morse and Senator Roush's bill would have added funds to the I-93 to be able
Right.
to complete that within the next few years. Because I-93 is the heart that goes right up to the middle of New Hampshire. It goes up to Lake Winnipesaukee, goes up to all the ski slopes, goes up to the White Mountains. So it's a main travel area. Being on the Business Coalition, we've met with a lot of businesses. We've met with the British Consulate, and one of the concerns they have is the transportation. I-95 sector is okay, Route 3 is okay, I-93 is a disaster. Now, how does that relate to Derry? Well, there was a bill that I sponsored, and it was called HB 532. The governor just signed that into law 2 weeks ago, and that's called the Volunteer Certification for Road Salt. And this is in combination of the I-93 expansion. Both the federal DOT and the federal EPA have mandated that unless we reduce our chlorides, which is road salt, then they will not allow, no matter how much money we have, further expansion of the I-93. In addition to that, EPA, via bypassing Congress and going through presidential orders, have indicated that they will put a stranglehold on the southern region of New Hampshire and reduce any economic development whatsoever based on square footages of lots that would be applied for. So what we've done, the state and the towns, including Derry, and Derry is one of the first ones to get on board, and fortunately the town councilors the other night approved a grant to bring in new equipment to reduce road salt by at least 30%. So that's a huge savings to Derry, because if we don't reduce it and EPA mandates it, we go from $65 a ton to $1,200 a ton.
What's the
This is
negotiations
huge, because
will
without
occur?
this here, I-93 will not expand.
Yeah.
No, and I was a co-sponsor on that bill as well. So
Yes.
I agree. It's a cost thing, and it's common sense. We have pH meters all around the state measuring the sodium levels in the water, and we have a problem, and we're trying to correct it.
There were a few interesting things that came out of the committee conference when we did the budget that were held hostage, important business items. There were two bills that I prime sponsored. One was net operating loss for those businesses who are struggling to get through to write off their losses and carry out those losses and pass. Now that was held hostage by the Democrats in the committee of conference between the Senate and the House, and I'm glad the Senate prevailed and stopped that delay so we can implement that business to keep businesses going. The other one we had was the thresholds for business enterprise tax filing. The business enterprise tax, or business profits tax rather, had a threshold of $100,000. That meant that even though you'd have to pay a tax, you have to pay the tax, you had to hire an accountant and produce a return, even though there was no tax due. So it wasted the Department of Revenue Administration's time with 20,000 of these blank filings, no money filings, and we were able to reduce that. And the Democrats held that hostage again, but we were able to pass both of those in this budget cycle, and there were two of the concessions that the House made. I think that the budget this year did very well as far as Republicans go. The Senate did an excellent job because it could have been much worse, as you know, in the votes we had in the House.
Right. Yeah. And now I guess we're talking about business. So as far as businesses are concerned, what do you think about, there was some talk or some emails going back and forth about the right to work debate, a couple of years ago, and that could be a reason why some of these businesses are not coming in. But I've always thought that, the electrical costs and the cost of doing business in New England is just high. What are your thoughts on that?
New Hampshire in particular is even high, not just New England, just
Debate will always come up. Some years it's an important issue, other years it's not as important. Whether or not some businesses decide to move here because of it or not, we don't really know. It's all speculation. We only hear anecdotal evidence. That's all we get in our committee, so it could go either way. I don't think that's going to be as big an issue in the next 5 or 6 years as it just was now, because the previous speaker made that a top priority.
Well, how about the, speaking of business and energy and all that, we're starting to get bombarded by these companies over this Northern Pass thing right now. I don't know if you guys got it in the mail. I got something in the mail, and my wife actually got something, which they seem to be targeting just regular residents now to push them forward on this Northern Pass issue, which to me was kind of surprising that my wife would get something on an issue that hadn't legislative implications and not citizen and we're Derry. We're not. It's not like we live up there.
We're not even on the pipeline.
We're not even on the pipeline. But I mean, and I know we switched to one of these other companies for our delivery charge because it was 27% less than public service.
Well, that's as a direct result of the legislature. We had a pilot program about 12, 13 years ago that now that led this, that brought us to this point. I think that was a very good move on our part. We brought in competition to reduce part of those rates.
Yeah, but there was an article in the Union Leader with PSNH basically saying when these smaller companies go bankrupt, who's picking that up? And right now, PSNH is, and it's not fair to them.
Yeah, but fear.
It's happening though, Frank.
But see, they don't own the lines. This is the problem. See, the lines are owned by the people, not by any particular company, but we're charged a delivery fee.
That issue always comes up whether we tax the lines too.
Yeah.
I'd like to jump in on this here, because first, to let you know that I am against the Northern Pass as it's currently being designed. The companies that Representative Webb discussed, those other companies are doing very well. Two of them, one did go bankrupt, two of them are very well stabilized with assets, but they do not use either coal or do they not use hydroelectric. They use a natural gas. And based on the meetings that we've had, both in the Ways and Means and other departments, that the next 20 to 25 years, based on the fracking that went on, that we have a substantial quantity of natural gas available. The Northern Pass via Hydro-Quebec, they want to bring power through the state of New Hampshire. We will not see any of that power whatsoever. The analysis is they're going to dump it into southern Massachusetts and Connecticut, and we may get a benefit. Based on the resistance, there's now talk that they may allow some of it to spill over, but right now the state of New Hampshire is selling power because of the agreement under PUC and PSNH that they're forced to buy power from resources that were put into the state, such as biomass and the coal plants. In addition to that, PSNH is also was forced a few years back to put in a $400 million scrubber in one of their particular facilities, and that's why their rates are much higher than some of the other rates. So at this point, there's still a discussion going on in Northern Pass.
Right.
I do a lot of mountain climbing up there, and I just came back from England, and I got to see firsthand the size of the towers. So the pictures that we see presented to us do no justice to what you actually see and what's going to happen to the landscape in northern New Hampshire.
Right. Now, speaking of that, I also enjoy mountain climbing as well. And I was just up last week, and I was driving up 93, I believe, or somewhere around that way, but they've got the wind towers.
Yep.
And they got like 8 or 9 of them.
Yep, out to the west.
What do you guys feel about that? I mean, you could see that in the mountainside, you know, all these windmills.
My favorite wind farm. We have some of the highest electricity rates, you know, in the country here. So anything that will generate it from a renewable energy source like that, that'll do it, and be able to get federal tax credits for it is, I think, is fine.
Well, I'd agree with you. I don't know if either one of you have been up at Prince Edward Island, but they have a wind farm up there.
Yes.
And there's probably 30 or 40 of these windmills all in one area, and they provide all the electricity for the island. And this is just in one area. So they produce these things. Well, they are huge. I mean, I had my truck parked underneath one of them, and it looked like it was a toy truck. Yeah. So but I too am in favor of any kind of renewable energy source that it's not going to hurt the environment. It's not putting any gases out there.
I think what you're going to see in Northern Pass is you're going to see, if there ever is a line coming down through there, it's going to be something where it's economically, it's going to cost them more money than what they're proposing right now.
Right.
That's where the trade-off is. I mean, you could simply run lines right down through the center medians of 93 to get it down.
Bury it, yeah.
You know, just bury it if you wanted to, but it costs too much money, so they're going to negotiate as much as they can. But you know, the opposition is healthy for it. It's going to come. I think the end result will end up being something that everybody can live with at some point.
Right.
I happened to be at a concert this weekend up in southern Maine and ran into another representative from the House of Maine, and there's a huge proposal for about 40 or 50 windmills outside in the Bay of Maine, so the Gulf of Maine. So that's being proposed out there also.
What did he have to say about that? Was he?
They were in
in
favor
favor,
with
yeah.
that. They were in favor. The only concern is the 20 years at the end of obsolescence, who's going to be responsible for tearing everything back down?
Well,
and that's
that
been some of
brings
the
up-
serious concerns.
That's very similar to the telecommunication towers. I mean, we've, you know, on planning board.
Nobody's bonding it.
Right. There's usually money set aside to take that stuff down when the technology gets better. But
Well, that's the same thing now. We look at public service right now being sold out to Connecticut Utilities there, and now I guess we're only using like 60% of the power produced by New Hampshire, and then we're selling it back to the grid. So I spoke to somebody on this the other day. Now we have the public service with the nuclear power plant sitting over there, and the decommission fee that we were charged, right? And I said,
And that was
wow.
sold to Massachusetts. We're
Yep,
paying the
yep.
decommissioning, and that belongs to Massachusetts. And
Well,
in the state of New
the
Hampshire.
company, Connecticut Utilities or wherever it is that owns it right now, owns the property, owns the building. They already sold one of the
National Grid,
reactors. They got their money back right off the bat. But the issue being is when it comes time to decommission that, is their money going to be there? Is the money there? Supposedly there's a couple $100 million there, but is that enough to decommission a nuclear
It
reactor?
grow over time. It always does.
Yeah. So that is a big issue. Windmills, I don't see a problem. You just knock them over.
Well, you can,
Pick up the pieces.
when that does come for time for decommissioning, you'll see what we usually do, and the legislature, I'm sure, will punt. Put it off to someone. As long as
It's
they
not
can.
like it's a hazardous material. It's a windmill. Knock it over, pick up the pieces, put another one up.
Right.
Not a big deal.
let's go back to committees, and maybe you can go back and think about something on your committee that either benefited Derry or maybe didn't benefit Derry. Anything that was controversial at all? Or?
I have a couple, if you don't mind, and if I get long-winded, I know Mr. Representative Webb will shut me off.
Keep it short.
And this actually benefits Londonderry more so than us. A bill came in front of the Agriculture Environmental Committee, and it was, and the name of the company is Moonlight Meadery out of Londonderry, and they were stopped by the Liquor Commission because the way they were taking honey and maple syrup and making wine out of it, or what they call mead wine, it was an illegal alcohol content, so they were shut down. So they came to us, and we put a bill in, and it passed unanimously. And 2 years ago, when they started this here, they only had a couple of people working for them. Now they have over 20 people there. They're growing. They're expanding and rebuilding an area that's also going to bring in wine and festivals and weddings. In addition to that, they are a nationwide company, and they are shipping all over the United States. And the Liquor Commission now has a front display with the meadery. And that also goes along with a lot of the other wine companies within the state of New Hampshire, that we're working with them, finding out what legislations is impacting their business. One of the breweries, Red Hook, over in the Portsmouth area had a problem, and they were not allowed to bring in a particular beer that was being manufactured out of Seattle. We changed that regulation, and now they're manufacturing it here, so they're expanding there also. So we're meeting with various groups, and the smaller groups, the small businesses, and the small families, we call it the Homestead Law. We allow that, changed the bill, unanimously passed both the House and the Senate. And now, at the farmers markets, you're going to see people there selling, whether it's raw goat's milk or raw cheeses, something manufactured to them. We took away the cumbersome government oversights, so up to a certain dollar value, so as they grow, and as long as they stay under that value, they can now sell to the public without all this filing that they had to do in the past and all this inspection services.
Yeah,
so that's been a benefit to the small people and small manufacturers in town.
I'd like to expand on that a little bit, because I know last year, being freshmen in the House, Brian and myself, and you as well, John, we heard lots of bills come by, go through the House and so forth, and we heard that New Hampshire, it has more licensing and regulation fees, in particular, just licensing in general, than any other state in the country. Maybe Frank, maybe you can expand on that.
That's true. I served 2 terms on ED&A, and you're absolutely right. And it's too bad. It's not the way it should be. You know, we make excessive red tape, and there are a lot of flaws. I'd like to see a lot of that streamlined. I think it has. It has in my industry, in securities, and you've seen some in real estate. Although it depends which side you're on. But yeah, we have a lot of problems in that regard. We have what's called 125 commissions, where we set up these agencies to regulate certain industries, and they're supposed to generate 125% of the revenue through licensing fees, fines, so forth, to them, than the cost to run that department. Right. So, and what's happened is that they really haven't come in at 125, and that's been some of those have been a drain on the general fund.
Huh. Can I add on to that?
Sure.
To what Representative Saparato said and Representative Webb. In the Business Coalition meeting, we had a lot of business people show up the last few weeks, so we can take a look at next year's, the 2014 legislation bills that we're going to put in. And we had small businesses in front of us, and to highlight what Representative Saparato just said, that one business requires a business ID, but they require a business ID for the Department of Labor. And within that Department of Labor, they have different IDs depending on what function they are in that department. The Department of Revenue has 2 or 3 revenue IDs on that based on business profit tax. Each one's a different ID. The Liquor Commission gives them a separate ID. The lottery sales, if they sell lottery tickets, is a separate ID. So when these people have to file, and they go on their computers, some of them they can do computers, some they have to go up there personally, everything is a single document. They cannot get one business ID that would print out all the information, basically a one-stop, and that's one of the things that we're looking at doing. And you should hear them discuss what they have to go through, because if they miss something, then instead of saying, oh, here's a warning, the fines are horrible.
After a number of terms up there, you realize that most of the departments like to be left alone. They like to run themselves. They don't want interference from the legislature, which we're supposed to. That's our job, is to have oversight to them.
Right.
So as a result, some of them are very reluctant to give us information necessary to make that department more efficient. And we run into this very often in Ways and Means, where we bring in the heads of these departments, we ask them questions, and we know who's telling us the truth and who's trying to stall or giving us roundabout answers. So we can tell where the problems are. But in order to get some things done, it takes a will of the whole House and Senate.
Right.
Yeah, I think both Brian and myself can really relate to that, because I co-sponsored a bill that Brian put in for insurance. And what we got from the department when we had the meeting and the talk and all that, and what was good and all that was totally
They're
different than
professionals
what they presented when it got the committee.
Sure.
So, talk about 180
'cause
turn.
they're doing this. They're there all the time. And then they'll see you, and then years from now, we're not to the next legislators, the next one, and they can still, they're pretty good at. They're pretty polished at most of these things.
And we know some of those lobbyists are pretty
And
strong
well, I'm
lobbyists.
talking even departments. I use a good example, the Department of Revenue Administration, which changed hands. The chiefs changed hands a few times. And to try to get, straight answers, we've got some good workers in that department who will tell us what we need to know. But in order to make changes, they come up around our backs. They'll make changes through rules. A good example is the limited liability corporations, where they decide to go after corporations, which is many of the people watching. You're forming these businesses. They're LLCs, and the Department of Revenue is saying that you didn't earn that money. You might have taken dividends. Even though you might have worked very hard to get that money, we're not going to count it. And you're guilty until proven innocent. Now, I'm glad to say that a couple of years ago, the Republican-led legislature turned that around and say, oh, no, now the DRA must prove that you didn't earn that now. So the burden of proof and the guilt should be on the Department of Revenue. Their previous position was that all taxpayers are guilty until they prove themselves innocent. We're able to turn that around and say, then you prove that they are guilty. Take their filings, and we brought a lot of conformity to that law. As it stands right now, you could earn $50,000 as an LLC without question. That's not income to you. Anything beyond that, you can claim it if you earned it. In an LLC, if you really earn that money, you can keep that as without having to pay business profits tax on. But at least now the DRA has become slightly more friendly. We have to keep them in check constantly.
Well, the DRA still needs a little bit more because they just fined the common man and all his restaurants over $60,000 fine. The DRA interpret, after this initial legislation had been in for almost 8 years, stated that any of the wait staff, the waiters and the waitresses, whatever money they made as tips, was now then charged as earned income and profits to the business. And then the business are now being fined for not paying taxes on what the staff made. And some of this is figuring that, well, if you charge X amount of money for a meal, then you assume 20% tax. They arbitrarily added that in there and are fining them. Fortunately, Senator Sanborn heard of that and was able to put a bill in to put a squash to it at this point in time till we can resolve it next year.
Right.
But that's not right.
But that applies to everybody. That if you're a hairdresser, you're a waitress, you work any place where you bring in tips, it's not going to be taxed to you, but the people who own those businesses will be included as income. The government will we'll guesstimate and say you really earned X amount based on the tips that your employees probably got, and we're going to charge you basically an income tax on that money.
Which is part of your wages.
Which filters down to the consumer eventually anyway, so it is a tax on the people.
Right, and then the wait staff have to actually report the tips. I mean,
Well,
they have to do that anyway, right?
And they do that and list it on your W when they file your W-9.
Right. Oh, that's interesting.
But of course, the big tax issue coming up is in 5 months from now. All the viewers here in Derry are about to get a nice surprise in their mail.
Yeah.
What's that?
Now, make sure you're sitting down when you open your Christmas present December 1st, because your December 1st tax bill is going to go through the roof. So I hope you're sitting down when you get it.
$3.37 per thou?
I would say it's about that.
Exactly,
Yeah. So
Will that actually make Derry the highest?
I believe that puts us in.
according to Legislative Services, they've yet to find a community in the United States that's higher.
In the United States now.
In the United States.
I was talking about
well, because
New
New Hampshire is one of the highest. It does have overall, on average, the highest property tax in the nation because we pay most of no income tax or sales. But you have certain communities that are very high. Certain communities are very low. Bentley, Newington, Rye, all of them are lower than almost all towns in Massachusetts. Get to Derry, Allenstown, Pittsfield, any of those other communities with lots of kids and low property values, their tax rates are almost approaching where Derry is, but we happen to spend a lot more here.
Right.
And I like to tag off on that is because I have a serious concern, even though under Senator Roush and a few of us that co-sponsored his bill last year, the education adequacy grant formula stayed the same.
Right.
Had a whole
Based on what we're hearing from other representatives, that they don't think Derry should be held to that level anymore. So a year and a half from now, we get ready for the next biennium in 2015, there's a possibility that we would be faced again with another loss of $7 million within the school system under the adequacy funding.
Now, what
In
do we-
addition to that, Senator Roush is right that with the decline for the last 8 years of the
Right.
student population, their revenue from the adequacy is changing. I think we lost about $1 million from what he said last time.
More.
So, that's a serious concern going out to the future.
What are we, we're at like 26 million right now, right? I believe. that the
Yeah,
state-
yeah,
school-
pretty close.
the state
yes.
is
the state
given-
at
Yeah, for the
20,
adequacy, yeah.
You're right.
I think
That's
the
not
bottom
including
line.
the FM and the food and so forth.
I think the bottom line is Derry's going to have to mothball some schools.
I've seen, we'll be discussing that in the near future.
Well,
I
If you
see
go back to
and, you know, that's not-
1997, we had 6,000 students. We had more than, about 6,000 students. And actually, the school budget at the time was $27 million. I remember voting at the time that, it was 1995.
What, did you say 27?
27?
That was the
million.
total?
In 1994, our school
Wow.
budget was
And we're at what,
27 million.
89?
We're now at about
687?
87 million. So it's gone up substantially. Now, we have fewer students than we had at that time. But back then, when we looked at, how many students did we have to our property values, Derry looked pretty good. We're getting the job done at a very low cost per student. Now that our budget's up that high, now tripled, more than about tripled, we don't look that good anymore. We aren't getting that bang for the buck or that so much dollars per student that makes us look frugal and look efficient. We don't look very efficient to our colleagues up there. So of course that's how we're
It's a
perceived.
local issue.
Yes,
The last
that's what
meeting
they're
that we
saying now,
had
yep.
with the superintendent and Pinkerton and the town council, we discussed with the new superintendent that she was going to be taking a look at probably forming a commission, because at that time we brought up that you could take a look at 2005. I won't say the name of the two schools, but each school was 600 students at that time, and as of 2009, not even today, there were 300 less in each school.
Right.
So, I mean, that's something they're going to have to take a look at. The school board
right.
needs
There's,
to-
there's less, but the state regulates how many kids per classroom per teacher.
Well, we
They-
had
they
minimum
have less
standards.
now.
There's
they have
guidelines. There's guidelines.
We had minimum standards, and people forget that at the time when Claremont came down, that we were going to be held, we were going to be penalized. We were receiving about $3 million in aid from the state, and they were going to hold it because we didn't comply with minimum standards.
Right.
So we really didn't have any local control because we had that held hostage over us. After the Claremont ruling, the state had to pay. There's no choice. They had to give the money at that time, so they had no control. We have total local control. But unfortunately, we vote on these budgets, and most times the default budgets are as high, if not higher, than the budget we're voting on. The voters really don't get a true option of what they can vote on.
Exactly.
What they can't.
It's
And I
usually
think
the
last
lesser of
vote-
two evils when you're
Sure.
voting, and it's very difficult
Well,
to
we're
even
talking about
understand
SB.
it.
We're actually talking about SB2 here.
Yep.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the way SB2 was originally crafted was you had a budget, and if that budget didn't pass, you had a default budget, but the default budget was supposed to always be lower than the regular
Right, the
budget.
default budget was supposed to be last year's budget, previous budget.
But
That's what it was supposed to be, that number, not that number plus automatic increases.
Right. So now what we typically see is we see a budget, and then the default budget is always higher. So do you think, that the process really pulls people out?
Well, Jim
Of that-
Rush and I are in full agreement that the default budget should be last year's budget, period.
I agree.
That's what
I
it should
agree
be.
as well.
Jim brought out, you brought that up as well. So
Right.
that's what it should be. Give the voters a real choice, because the vote we just took on the assistant teachers right now that passed by 3 votes after the recount right now, that really wasn't against those teachers. I'm sure many of us realize that they're worth every penny of what that
These are the
raise
a-
would
these
be.
are the aides
Right,
that-
but however, the voters are upset because of what happened at the last meeting, where they not only gave the schools everything that they wanted, all the dollars they wanted, they added another $1 million onto our property taxes for good measure, and I think that upset a lot of residents here.
And I also think that the way we just did the special election should be the way all these votes are taken. None of, when 60 people show up and determine 21,000 people's destiny. We have close to 21,000 registered voters here in Derry,
Voters out of 33,000.
and 60 people made that
But
decision.
on the flip side of that, guys, that's how a democracy works. If you show up to vote, and that's the vote, that's what it
You don't
is.
show up, you don't count.
So
Well, we just went to an event this week, and we were talking about that, and I brought that issue up because 2 particular people talked to me and that day alone said that they are disgusted with government and the way government runs and the process, and it doesn't matter who's in control, Republicans or Democrats, and that's how they're
But
feeling.
the problem
We're
is
better
do you,
off than Afghanistan.
right, the problem with that,
That's
Jim, is
exactly,
do
you're
those
right.
same people disengage because they're upset about government and do nothing?
They're part of the problem.
Because that is part of the problem.
Yeah,
Apathy
right.
is the worst possible thing.
Exactly, and that's what's happening. People are not coming out to vote.
Do the voters know how many, in our last elections, that the last, was it 3 or 4 of them have been decided by one vote?
So everybody's
One vote
vote
has made
counts.
a difference in every single election now. Now for the past, for town council elections,
Right.
state representative elections, budget in the school, all by one vote. You just got to show
Or a
up.
couple of votes, yeah. Everybody's vote counts, and people need to realize that when it's time for an election. I think the town should have those signs up on the road, letting everybody know that there's
Absolutely.
an election that day, and everybody's vote counts. Every vote counts.
Let's talk about what your thoughts about, we talked about education, the quality of education in Derry. Now, I've compared some of the Derry schools to Londonderry schools, and most people think that Londonderry's got the better system. Well, I can tell you that's not necessarily the case. So, for quality education, what are your thoughts about what the product that Derry delivers?
Well, first of all 3 of my children went through the school system in Pinkerton, and they all did very well, and I'm very pleased with the school system.
Yeah.
But there's a change going on, and not having anybody involved with the school system, I'm just starting to learn. And from what I understand, and looking at recently on the Derry school website, that approximately, I believe, 3 years ago, they're changing some of their system from the current, I guess, No Child Left Behind to what's called Common Core. And I don't know which one's better. I hear a lot against Common Core. I hear there's some good in Common Core. I hear that some of the Common Core leaves kids behind. So I'm undecided on that there, and until I'll be able to talk with somebody, whether it be on the school board or in the systems, until I learn more about it. So,
Right.
But I can say that my children went through the system, and they did very well with it. I was pleased with the system. Cost is another thing, but
Right. What do you think,
Well,
Frank?
my kids just went. My youngest now is a senior at Pinkerton. My oldest is now in Bryant University. But I went through all the system from grade 1s through Pinkerton, and I think that we've got the best education here that we can buy for our Auburn residents, actually. And for many others, as I've said, my peeve has always been that the best deal you get in Pinkerton is if you live in Auburn or somewhere outside of Derry, where you can get the town of Derry, all the residents, through our property taxes to pay for services for them. And I think that's a great deal. And each time we're saying, oh, there's not very many students, there aren't very many there, but most people don't know that more than a third of Pinkerton's population is someplace else, not from Derry.
Right.
And I don't see them paying for fire or police services, so that's why I'm very strongly on that particular issue, that every single year it adds up. Maybe it's only $1 million each year, but $1 million here, $1 million there for a number of years. This is one of the reasons why Derry's tax rate is so much higher than our surrounding communities. Not to mention that the cost of that property, they pay no taxes whatsoever. And every time they buy a property, it comes off the tax rolls, and you and I, Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer, are picking up that tab.
Right. I mean, in all fairness, Auburn does not have the infrastructure that Derry does as far as police, fire. I mean, they have a volunteer fire department.
When the students are here, they're using
Chester and
ours.
Hampstead.
Right, I understand.
They use ours.
Right.
It's like moving the entire town of Auburn to Derry every day.
Right.
Now, for the sake of being fair, Pinkerton actually is probably one of the lower cost high schools in the state for it. So we're actually getting
overall average.
we're getting a deal by having Pinkerton. But you're absolutely right.
Because I get a great deal, that's why I shop at Walmart. I could go shop in someplace more expensive, but I'll shop to get a bargain. My point is that you can't waste money when people are barely struggling to keep their homes right now, and there's no reason why a Derry resident should have to pay for the services for someone in Auburn. Well, it's not fair, or Hampstead.
I would tend to agree with you on that particular part of it, but like I said, Pinkerton overall is not our problem, because it's cheaper to go to or less expensive to go to Pinkerton than if we had our own high school, more than likely, because we'd have the same issues.
I'm just talking about fairness. I'm just talking about pay for your own. That's all.
Well, I understand that, but the big problem is taking things off the tax map, and a lot of buildings have come off the tax map here in Derry, and then that brings us to a whole nother issue with all these buildings. Like, for instance, the new freshman building's beautiful. I mean, you guys have been in there. It's absolutely beautiful, but when my neighbors are losing their home to foreclosure, should they be building, $30, $40 million buildings,
We don't have a choice. We don't have a say in that. We have no say whatsoever. The Board of Trustees determine that, of Pinkerton, not Derry residents.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why I think that it should be fair, and even for anybody who sends students there, share in the costs equally, do it fairly, and we're not doing that.
Right.
It is a great school, though. Let's,
I'm not knocking the
my
school at
my
all.
kid's got a
I'm
great
just talking about
education there,
fairness.
too.
If you really want to get a good bargain, move outside of Derry, Hampstead, send your kids over to Pinkerton, you get a great deal.
Real quick, I want to talk about something on the county side that I found kind of interesting. There was a $3 million bond at the county level for dispatch services for the smaller communities. And some of the county commissioners are really in a heavy debate about whether these small communities should actually pay a little bit extra for this service, because we all know Derry doesn't need, we have our own service, Londonderry as well, and Portsmouth. So the larger communities have their own dispatch.
Yeah.
So are we paying this bond for something that we don't use? And what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm on the executive committee. We have a meeting coming up next week, and that's going to be brought up by me again. And I agree with you that if the Brentwood, Rockingham wants to put their dispatch system in, and that those that are going to use it should pay for it.
Yep.
Again, a lot of us already have our own dispatch system here, so we should not be picking up the cost for that
That's right.
whatsoever. And I believe our commissioner, Kevin Coyle, is also in support of what I'm saying too, that it should not be charged to those that already have a dispatch system.
Yep.
Right. But what are your thoughts on the flip side of that when these smaller communities are saying, well, you know, Derry's sending all these senior citizens to the nursing home and we're paying for the costs?
We're all paying for
We're
the
all paying
cost.
that
But
cost.
that's
How are
what,
they paying?
what they're saying, is, but
But
they're
it-
getting
yeah,
taxed on it on a same level, same dollar amount.
So
but we've
it's the
got
same
more.
thing, basically.
Well, it depends where you
Well, if we
drive.
put our own nursing house in here, then we would be, then they wouldn't have to pay for our nursing home.
My point is this. I mean, when we talk about regionalization of services, I think it's kind of a wise idea. We talked about it with the schools in Auburn sending their kids to there. Now we're talking about dispatch. So, you know, do you like regionalization of services or do you not like it?
As long as proportioned accurately, I mean, the billing is done proportionately and fairly. You know, it's not always done that way. Economy of scale isn't always a law in Derry's case. So,
But under our state statutes, if we do regionalization within various groups, then it's an established, what they call MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding. That's established within that group, within those counties, within the state.
you could have the same argument for state police. You know, we have our own law enforcement here, but there are many communities in southern New Hampshire that don't have their own police force.
And we're paying for it.
And
Well,
they're-
many
we're,
up
we're all
north-
paying
up
for it.
north they
absolutely.
use the state
And up
police.
north, well, they use it here too in the southern tier. In some of the communities, there's population fall under, you know, a very low population. They don't have their own force, our volunteer forces. So we're all picking up that tab. So there are inequities
Yeah.
almost
Absolutely.
everywhere.
All right, well, I was like to say I'm on the executive committee as well, and we'll be hearing that, and I tend to agree with John's point of view on that, but we are actually running out of time. I got the 5-minute point a few minutes ago, so why don't we close with a very short, we'll start with you, John, we'll let you, well, maybe we'll start with Frank.
Oh, I don't mind. Me too. Go ahead, John.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Well, again, I look forward to next year. I don't think we're going to be seeing most of the major issues come up in the second year. Usually in election years, you have most of the fluff stuff. So if anybody's making waves, I probably will if there's a couple of issues. But I think that we're looking at a major change in New Hampshire revenue coming up within a year or two. And that's where I think the biggest impact will be.
Real quick for Frank, I heard a rumor that you may be running for speaker. Is that true?
If Bill O'Brien is not planning on running again, and if Gene comes in again and opposes gambling, and we don't have that, I have no baggage with any leadership team whatsoever, and I've been there long enough to know how it works. And I think we can work in conjunction with the Senate instead of opposing it. We have the same party and power in both the House, both chambers, and we can't get things done. There's something wrong with the party there, or something wrong with that leadership. So in that case, I would step in.
great.
But however, if Jim Rush decides not to run again, that also
Opens up the, right, absolutely.
John?
John?
Again, I'm going to continue on the Business Coalition, trying to do the best what is right for the businesses in here, being in my background. But I just want to put a feather in all of our hats, because all of you co-sponsored. We didn't bring up my white potato, which is now the bill. It's now
Excellent
law.
job, and Lee did
It's
a
now the
great job
state
with that.
vegetable, thanks to the children in the Derry Village School System, that we've learned a lot. In conjunction, that our town historian, as we speak right now, is in Derry, Londonderry, Northern Ireland, sharing that same report with them and the students over there. So
Great.
All right,
thank
well,
you for all
We
co-sponsoring
do have a
the
great
bill.
delegation.
Yeah.
We get a lot done too, and a lot of hard workers too. And
well, I'd like to thank you guys for coming on the show, and I'm going to have to close now because we're out of time, so we'll have you back in another time, but this has been the Legislators Lounge. If you would like to see any of our previous shows, you can go onto the YouTube and just search Legislators Lounge. You can go to our website, derrylounge.com, And you can also find us on Facebook if you search Legislators Lounge. Once again, thank you, and till next time.
Thank you for having us.
Service.